Tonight, he lost everything. Not slowly, not over months, but in one silent moment when the light in his room went out, and the light inside him almost did too. What if losing everything was the only way to find who you truly are? They say the darkest night births the brightest flame, but when you're trapped inside that darkness, it's hard to believe light was ever real. The city outside keeps rushing, trains, deadlines, people who look fine even when they're falling apart. But inside one quiet apartment, a single lamp flickers against the silence. The air tastes like burnt coffee and old promises. On the desk lies everything he's trying to outrun: a termination letter and a photograph turned face down. He once had everything the world celebrates: the office view, the title, the applause. But tonight, even breathing feels like work. His hands, the same hands that built everything, now tremble, as if they've forgotten what purpose feels like. How did I get here? When did I lose the person I was supposed to become? Have you ever felt that too? Like you're watching your own life slip away, one quiet moment at a time? If that's you, type just one word below: felt. Because this story isn't just about him, it's about anyone who's ever forgotten their own light. He sinks to the floor and clutches the photograph. The smile in it feels like a ghost that refuses to fade. Maybe this is it, he whispers. Maybe some fires just burn everything down. But beneath that thought, something glows, small, fragile, alive. A whisper in the dark says, "The same fire that destroys also forges." Tears fall, but a faint warmth remains. This isn't the end. This is the ashes before the rising, and so begins the story of a soul that lost everything, only to discover the phoenix within. Before everything turned to ash, his life glowed with a steady flame. Every morning began with purpose. Every evening ended with quiet victory. He moved through the world like someone who knew exactly where he was going. And for a long time, he did. The office lights, the coffee meetings, the calendar filled with plans. They gave shape to his days. People called him dependable, strong, unstoppable. He wore those words like armor, believing that as long as he kept moving, nothing could ever catch him. Not failure, not loneliness, not silence. At home, he smiled for the people who loved him, even when his heart felt like a room he hadn't entered in years. He'd say he was fine. He always said he was fine, because somewhere along the way, fine became easier than honest. There were cracks, small ones, he chose not to see. A friend's worried glance, a night when sleep refused to come, moments when laughter felt rehearsed and silence pressed heavy on his chest. But he kept running, faster, louder, harder, because running felt like control, and control felt like safety. Until the day the world stopped running with him. It happened suddenly. A phone call, calm, detached, like someone reading from a script that had already ended. Downsizing, position eliminated, effective immediately. 3 sentences that ended an entire chapter. He sat there frozen, as if time had decided to move on without him. That night, he walked home in the rain. City lights blurred behind the water on his glasses. Each drop felt like truth he'd been too afraid to face. He had built his life on the belief that motion meant meaning. And now, there was nowhere left to go. He stood outside his door for a long time before unlocking it. The room felt smaller than it used to. The silence, louder. He set his phone on the table and realized he had no one to call. Not even himself. He sat down, hands trembling, and looked at the photograph on his desk. the same tired smile staring back at him. And in that still moment, he saw what he'd refused to see for years. The storm hadn't begun that night. It had been gathering, quietly, all along. And now, it had come to collect what he'd been hiding from. Have you ever had a moment like that? If you've been there, comment one word. Still, the days that followed blurred into one another. He woke up and went to sleep without knowing which was which. Time lost its rhythm. The world outside kept spinning, while he stood still in the middle of its noise. Morning light no longer felt warm. It only reminded him that another day had begun, and he still hadn't moved any closer to feeling whole. The clock ticked like an accusation. The walls whispered his thoughts back to him. He tried to fill the silence. Music, television, endless scrolling, anything to drown out the sound of his own mind. But the silence always returned, like the tide that refuses to forget the shore. He stopped answering calls. Friends stopped trying. They said they understood, but understanding can't reach where loneliness lives. Sometimes he wondered if anyone would notice if he simply disappeared. At night, he stared at the ceiling for hours, tracing cracks in the plaster as if they could map a way out of his thoughts. Sleep only came when exhaustion defeated despair, and even then, his dreams were restless, half memory, half wish. There was a journal on his nightstand. Its pages were filled with questions, unfinished sentences, empty space. What is peace? Where does happiness hide? Each page smaller than the last, his hope shrinking between the lines. He'd sit by the window sometimes, watching rain trace crooked paths down the glass. It comforted him, the way it fell without needing to explain itself. Maybe he envied the rain, how it could weep openly and still be part of something beautiful. He told himself it was temporary, that pain would pass if he waited long enough. But the waiting became another kind of suffering. He didn't even know what he was waiting for anymore. A knock on the door, a miracle, a reason to keep breathing. Then, one evening, something changed. It wasn't dramatic. No light from the heavens, no revelation, just a sound, a faint, broken cry from the street below. He looked out and saw a small bird, its wings trembling, trapped in the rain. It tried to move, but couldn't. He hesitated, then stepped outside, barefoot, into the cold. The world felt heavier than ever, but as he knelt beside that fragile life, something inside him shifted. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about his own pain. He was thinking about saving something else. And that was the night the darkness stopped being empty. It wasn't gone, but somewhere within it, a spark had begun to breathe. He carried the tiny bird inside, wrapping it gently in an old towel. Its feathers were soaked, its heartbeat fragile, but its eyes still searched for life. He placed it near the warmth of a lamp, watching steam rise from its trembling wings. And for the first time in months, his hands were doing something that mattered. Hours passed. He changed the towel, fed it drops of water from a spoon, and listened to the faint rhythm of breath that seemed to answer his own. When the bird finally moved, stretching one weak wing, he felt something inside him stir, a quiet relief, a pulse he thought was gone. He spoke softly, not even knowing why. "You're stronger than you look." Maybe he wasn't talking to the bird at all. Maybe he was talking to himself. The night felt different now. The silence still lingered, but it no longer hurt the same way. It felt gentler, as if even the air was learning to forgive. He didn't realize it yet, but that small act of care had cracked something open. He had stepped outside the prison of his thoughts, and in that single act of kindness, he had found a doorway to healing. When morning came, the rain had stopped. The world smelled new again. He opened the window, and sunlight spilled into the room, catching the shimmer of tiny feathers. The bird looked at him once more, and then, as if remembering what wings were made for, it lifted off. Its flight was uneven at first, but each beat grew stronger, surer, freer, until it vanished into the bright sky. He stood there, smiling through tears. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't afraid of endings. He understood something simple, something he could finally feel. Sometimes we heal the moment we stop trying to fix ourselves and start tending to what is broken in the world. He turned back to the room. It didn't feel empty anymore. The light on the wall looked softer, the air a little warmer, as if the world itself had exhaled with him. He whispered, almost in disbelief, "Maybe hope doesn't arrive. Maybe it wakes." And outside, in the distance, a single bird's cry answered him. Like an echo of promise, days turned into weeks. He began to walk again, not to escape, but to feel the ground beneath his feet. Each step, though small, felt like a quiet conversation with the earth. He wandered to the edges of the city, where noise gave way to wind and dust. And there, by chance, he met an old man, sitting beside a crumbling wall, feeding stray dogs from a paper bag. The man looked up and smiled, not the polite smile of strangers, but the kind that remembers pain and forgives it. "You look tired," the old man said, his voice like worn silk. "I am," the traveler replied. "I've lost too much. I don't even know who I am anymore." The old man chuckled softly. "Then you're lucky," he said. "Most people never lose themselves deeply enough to find who they truly are." He tore a piece of bread, still warm from the sun, and handed it over. "Eat," he said. "You'll need strength to rebuild." They sat together in silence, watching the dogs play in the dust. Then the old man spoke again. "Do you know why the phoenix burns?" The traveler shook his head. "It isn't punishment," the man said. "It's remembrance. Fire is how it remembers what it's made of. Pain doesn't destroy it. It refines it." The words hung in the air, settling between them like falling ash. The traveler looked down at his hands, still trembling, still human, and asked quietly, "How do you know all this?" The old man smiled. "Because I once forgot too, and the fire had to remind me." When the traveler looked up again, the old man was gone, as if carried away by the wind itself, but beside him lay a single feather, charred at the tip, glowing faintly in the fading light. He picked it up, turning it over in his palm. It was light, fragile, almost unreal. Yet holding it, he felt something ancient stir within him. He whispered to the empty air, "Maybe the fire isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning." And from somewhere unseen, a whisper seemed to answer, not in words, but in warmth. Have you ever met someone, even for a moment, who changed the way you saw your own pain? If so, comment one word below. Reminded. That night, he couldn't sleep. The feather lay on the table beside him, its faint glow pulsing like a heartbeat. He stared at it for hours, feeling something awaken inside him, a quiet unease, but also a strange kind of strength. He closed his eyes. Images began to surface. The bird he had saved, the rain-soaked streets, the fire in the old man's eyes. They weren't memories anymore. They were mirrors. Each image whispered the same truth. You cannot be reborn if you refuse to burn. He had spent his whole life running from pain, trying to cover it, silence it, outgrow it. But pain, he realized, was not his enemy. It was the teacher he had never listened to. He stood and walked outside. The sky was deep and black, stitched with faint stars. The city slept, but the wind carried the scent of rain and ash, the scent of change. He found an open field beyond the streetlights, where weeds swayed like whispers. There, he lifted the feather toward the sky. "I'm tired of running," he said softly. "If the fire must come, let it come." He closed his eyes, and for a moment, the world was utterly still. Then, warmth bloomed through his chest. Not painful, but pure, like the sun rising from within memories surfaced again, not as wounds, but as light. His mistakes, his losses, his fears, all burning, yes, but transforming too. He fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, as the fire inside him rose higher than the night, and yet, nothing outside him changed. No one saw the flames, no ashes touched the ground, because the fire wasn't in the world, it was in his becoming. When he opened his eyes again, the feather was gone. In its place, a faint mark shimmered on his palm, like the trace of a flame that never went out. He looked up at the sky, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel small beneath it. He felt part of it. The stars no longer seemed distant. They were reflections of the fire he carried within. He whispered, almost afraid of his own voice, "This is what it means to rise." And somewhere in the darkness, the night wind answered, carrying his words into eternity. Morning arrived like forgiveness. The first light spilled over the horizon, painting the sky in colors he had never truly seen before: amber, rose, and a gold that seemed to hum with life. He walked back toward the village, barefoot, each step pressing softly into the damp earth. He expected to feel tired, but instead, he felt light. The world hadn't changed. Children still chased each other through narrow streets. Vendors still called out their prices. Dogs barked in the distance. And yet, everything felt new, sharper, alive. He stopped beside a mirror of water in a clay pot. For the first time in years, he looked at his reflection, really looked. The lines on his face told a story of breaking, but his eyes had changed. They held something fierce, something calm, a light that wasn't borrowed from the sun. He smiled. Not the practiced smile he used to wear, but the kind that comes from knowing. Not everything lost is gone forever. People passed by, but he didn't feel the need to be seen anymore. He was no longer trying to prove he had risen. He was simply rising, with every breath, every step, every quiet moment that asked for nothing but presence. At the edge of the street, he saw a young boy struggling to carry a heavy basket. Without thinking, he stepped forward and helped him lift it. The boy smiled, surprised. "Thank you, sir," he said. The man smiled back. "Don't thank me," he said gently. "Just remember, even ashes can grow wings." The boy tilted his head, confused, but the man only laughed softly and walked away, his shadow stretching long and golden in the morning light. As he moved through the crowd, a faint warmth pulsed again in his chest, the same quiet fire it no longer burned to destroy, but to illuminate. And in that moment, he understood. Rebirth isn't a single moment. It's the slow unfolding of courage, a choice made again and again to rise even when nothing asks you to. The world around him was still loud, still imperfect, but the noise no longer owned him. He carried the silence of the fire, the peace of the ashes, and the strength of the wings he had once thought were gone. As he disappeared into the morning light, the wind carried his whisper, a vow made not to the sky, but to himself. "I am not what broke me, I am what rose from it." Days passed like soft pages turning in a sacred book. He no longer counted them. He no longer chased them. Time, once his enemy, had become a gentle companion. He began to notice small things again. The way sunlight danced across broken glass, how laughter echoed differently in the evening air, how silence, when met without fear, wasn't emptiness at all, but presence. Each morning, he walked to the same field where he had once stood trembling in the dark. The air there still carried the scent of ash and earth, but now it also smelled of rain and new beginnings. He sat beneath a tree, the same tree that had once seemed lifeless, its branches now brushed with tender leaves. Birds gathered above him, their songs weaving through the air like prayers that had finally found their voice. He closed his eyes and listened, not for words, but for truth. And in that stillness, he realized something beautiful. The fire within him was not gone. It had simply changed its purpose. It no longer burned to remind him of pain, but to light his path forward. The world was not gentler than before. Storms still came. Loss still lingered. Tears still fell. But inside him, there was space now. Space wide enough to hold both joy and sorrow without breaking. He remembered the old man's words. Fire is remembrance. And he smiled. Because now, he understood. The flame had not destroyed him. It had revealed him. He stood and looked toward the horizon, where the sky shimmered between dusk and dawn, as if day and night had learned to live together. He whispered softly, "Even the dark carries light, if you know how to see." As the wind rose, it caught the edges of his clothes, lifting them like wings, and for a heartbeat, it looked as though he might take flight. He didn't. He didn't need to, because he had already risen, not from the ground, but from within himself. As the seasons shifted, the man began to wander again, not as an escape, but as a return. He walked through cities filled with noise and neon, through quiet villages wrapped in fog, through fields where the earth still remembered fire. But this time, he carried something invisible, a calm so deep that even chaos bowed before it. People noticed. They couldn't explain why, but when he passed by, conversations softened. Children stopped crying. Even stray dogs followed him for a while, as if drawn to the warmth that lingered in his steps. He never preached. He never claimed to be healed. He simply was, present, steady, alive. Once, in a crowded marketplace, a woman called out to him. "Sir," she said, "how do you stay so calm when the world is always breaking?" He paused, watching her tired eyes, the same fear he once carried reflected in them. He smiled gently and replied, "When fire burns a forest, it seems like destruction, but beneath the ashes, new roots are already forming." The woman looked down, silent, then nodded. As if she had finally understood something she had always known, he moved on. But his words stayed behind, like embers waiting to ignite another soul. Wherever he went, he found people searching for peace, for meaning, for a way to rise. He didn't tell them how to live. He simply told them stories, stories of storms that shaped, of pain that purified, of endings that became beginnings. Each story was a mirror, and in those reflections, people began to see their own strength. One night, as he sat beside a small fire under a vast sky, he realized what his journey had truly been about. It was never about escaping the darkness. It was about learning to carry light into it. He looked up at the stars, so many, so distant, and whispered, "If even one spark from my fire helps another soul to rise, then my ashes were worth it." The flames flickered, soft and golden, as if bowing in agreement. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't walking towards something. He was becoming it. And so, his journey came full circle. Not with thunder, not with applause, but with a quiet breath that carried the story of his becoming. He had walked through pain, burned through loss, and risen, not as someone new, but as who he had always been beneath the ashes. The phoenix, he realized, was never a creature waiting in the sky. It was the soul, our soul, that remembers how to rise even when it's afraid to fall. We all burn, we all lose. But from the fragments of what breaks us, we build the wings that lift us. The art of rebirth is not about escaping the fire. It's about learning to glow through it. So tonight, if your heart feels heavy, if you're walking through your own storm, remember this: you are not what broke you. You are what rises from it. And when the world feels dark, close your eyes, breathe deep, and whisper to yourself, I am still here, and I am still rising. You've been listening to Uplyft Tales, where stories remind us that every ending is only a quieter beginning. If this story touched your heart, leave one word in the comments: rise. It's not just a word. It's your promise to yourself to keep going, to keep believing, to keep becoming. Until next time, breathe deeply, walk gently, and remember, the fire within you was never meant to destroy. It was meant to reveal who you truly are.